As we get rolling here, everybody, welcome for coming in. And always any questions, chat, ideas, anything, just feel free to throw them in as we go. We're going to let things kind of let people kind of come in, realize they came in, they got the meeting notice late, and have them come in and not have to restart the banter. But yeah, welcome and excited to share today a couple really cool ideas from research that Will and I, he's next to me on the screen, have been doing along with Dylan, who's somewhere on the screen. Some work from Meyer that's talking about how to scrub important information from old documents, and then hopefully some discussion about where things might live short and long term. Thanks, Skye, for running these and setting them up, and the whole NCSS crew here to kind of make this stuff happen.
Sure. And since you are about ready to get started, let me do my little intro.
Yep.
Welcome everybody. This is a webinar series hosted by the National Cooperative Soil Survey Research Webinar Subcommittee. So there's several of us that have put these together. Dan Hermes, Matt Levi, Stephanie Connolly, Mark Kimsey, Yakun Zhang, John Maynard, and Katie Nitzky. And today we have as our host, Garrett Liles. He is are you a professor at Chico State?
I am.
So
yeah.
He has got a great series of speakers. This is meant to be informal. We will keep the chat open, or you can use the Q&A. And we have enabled cameras and microphones, so please come in off mute, and especially at the end, there should be plenty of time for conversation. I put at the very top of your chat some information. Look for our content, Soil and Plant Science Division, on our YouTube channel. We have a couple past research seminars that there are links to, and we'll have another one linked to soon. We have an upcoming webinar with a new registration page for the Dynamic Soil Properties for Soil Health series, which Katie Nitzky is hosting. And then we'll have a couple more coming up soon. New Tech and Soil Survey for continental scale, and an MIR in Soil Survey series that should have a bunch of really interesting new information. But today, I'd like to welcome all our speakers and let you know that we will put this up on our YouTube page just as soon as we get the transcript all cleaned up. But I'm happy to connect anybody that wants to share more information. This has been a perennial topic of our research committee for like years now. Everybody is always interested in this. We know there's a bunch of soil data laying around, there's samples laying around, there's paper sheets. Like, what do we do with all that? And so I'm really excited to hear about this today. So I'm going to turn over to you, Garrett.
Right on, Skye. Thank you so much. And thanks for everybody in attendance. I'm checking out the list. We got, heavy representation from the agency and a few folks that are affiliated. So hopefully this one really hits for many of you. And by the end, hopefully you see how you, your office, people that you know in the agency or affiliated people can be a part of what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to share my screen. I first want to introduce my co-conspirator, Will Nitzky, and I should have the ... many others. And then Dylan Beaudette, who's here as well, will be talking later as an anchor component of this whole research. So I'm going to share what I got. Let's see the share. Go. Right. So what are we going to do today? We're going to be talking about everyone's favorite subject, correlation boxes. I really wish that I had a little bit more backstory about their history. I haven't really gotten to that piece of it yet, but we'll be talking about our work through a cooperative agreement that's been trying to collect these in a digital archiving sense, and some other pieces, kind of how it started, where we're at, and our hopes. And hopefully by the end of this, we will know, we will have some leads onto some more and stuff like that. So unlocking the potential. And I think anyone that's worked with these boxes understands they're super valuable, not just as a resource for the mapper to make sure, hey, Skye, you're not muted, Skye. You might want to, just in case, make too much noise in the background. So that's what we're doing. Like I said, this is a collaborative work with the agency, us here at California State University, Chico, or Chico State, whichever you want to call it, kind of masked through the Center for Regenerative Ag and Resilient Systems. So me and Will are going to toggle back and forth between what we got here. But as Skye said, at any point, please feel free to hit us up in the chat, raise your hand. We don't want this to be a linear presentation. If there's reasons to stop or things that need to be clarified or any of that, please stop us and we'll go from there. So what is our project? Well, our project has really been focused on documenting these boxes and honoring them by finding where they are and digitally archiving them, right? And making them into a form that could be valuable to many folks. So we've been working on that over the last couple of years, and I'll tell you the backstory about how this kind of started for me and my connection to the agency. But so we've been working locally and farther to try to identify collections of these boxes and go out and digitally archive them. This is kind of, multi-purpose. We really want to honor the effort that has gone into creating these boxes and really see this as a lens for people that both are trained and have knowledge, but maybe more importantly, people that don't have knowledge of soils, as a way to get them interested in soils as the most valuable resource on the planet, and their diversity, their beauty, those types of things. This is a value add, and that's a piece that came kind of later to my mind, but this idea that this is a value added activity. We really want to take something that's already had a bunch of taxpayer investment and effort, sweat, scrape knuckles, all that kind of stuff, and bring some additional value and some durability to that value over time. And then a piece that we're going to talk about a little bit, which we had bold goals at the beginning, but the stoppage and startage with the shutdowns and stuff, it's just been not as easy to get this last piece, which is try to collaborate with the scientists that produce these boxes and the knowledge that goes with them relative to soil survey products and things like that, and try to bring that to the surface as well, and bring some of that subtlety that gets lost in the structure of the soil survey products, and bring some of those people and those ideas to the surface. We've done a little, and this is related to my partner Will, who's a cultural anthropologist, and our efforts to try to bring multifacets of this out of this project. So what are correlation boxes? If you don't know, basically it's just a way to create a physical archive of the samples that were collected during soil survey activities. They're nice, simple, fairly compact, and a nice way to look at the efforts of soil survey beyond the initial mapping. And from my knowledge, and I've been involved in this off and on for 25 years or so, in some version or another. The reality that before this, it was just a lot of times just a field description, and the mapper was using that information, their knowledge, maybe a couple of pictures, where this not revolutionized, but really helped provide some winter work and some way to validate some of the things that maybe a mapper saw early in the field. They're really powerful. They make soils accessible to many. They show diversity. They really might be a valuable tool in getting people to understand that soils are not just something that you drive over or till. And there's also a lot of beauty in these in pretty pictures. So how do we get here? Just a quick backstory. I always try to throw your kids in these. They're for everyone, right? This is an example of the process of making them and kind of an end use now. I have FFA Field Day on Saturday that we're hosting, and these boxes that I have some will get used. They're a great tool for people to just really see that soils are not just something that blows around in the wind. It started back when I was a student, grad student at UC Davis starting, and they were doing the Lassen Park soil survey. And I was fortunate to be involved in that. And we started to take every pit and that we had, and we put it into a correlation box and had it as an archive. And I saw the value of this early on, and I've been tinkering with it as a grad student. And then that kind of moved forward to me getting my position here at Chico State and getting a dynamic soils property funding, and then doing this as a side hustle, right? Like the money went to producing some data about soil health, but I was able to fund a master's student, Irfan Iduddin, who's finishing up his PhD at Minnesota now. And we really got inspired to try to digitally archive these boxes, take really high quality pictures. He produced a working website. I'll make sure and throw this website in the chat so you can check it out. And created a working website where you could visualize the box, field photos that we had taken from the soil survey activity of the landscape and the pit. And then he also transcribed the information from the field sheets, the 262s, I believe, if my memory serves, into something where someone could interact with this information and not just the soil map, and it would end up on the map. So that was kind of the start of this. And then that led us to more today. So I'm going to kick it over to Will, and he's going to talk about some other really important ideas that blend this all together.
Hey, everybody. In addition to being an accomplice of Dr. Garrett Liles in this really incredible project, I'm also a cultural anthropologist, as Garrett mentioned. I'm also a museum professional, and I direct our Museum of Anthropology at Chico State campus. I also conduct a lot of research on the topic of heritage and heritage management and protection. So when I started working with Garrett on this project, it really started making me think about how soils are our common heritage. And I think a lot of you, if not all of you, would agree with that, with this particular statement. And really, like, you know, I was fortunate to meet Garrett and also start to look through this lens of soil science, which really allowed me to understand the unique appreciation and an understanding of the variety of soils, of landscapes, of different perspectives, and also communities around the world that are connected to soil. And so, as you can see on the slide, it also raised a series of questions for me that go beyond just the mechanicistic functions of soil to thinking about the economics and cultural capital associated with soil, about supporting livelihoods and also practices and personal sentiments related to soil and landscapes. And then thinking about another question about how we can improve or encourage the improved soil understanding and utilization and management. So this then begged an interesting question as Garrett and I started working together about this problem that really exists, and I think a lot of you would agree, on the lack of availability of soil knowledge. And what I'm really talking about is public access to that knowledge, which can contribute, of course, to academic research, you know, knowledge in the classroom for students and young students in primary and secondary and also higher education, but also for policy makers, right? And so even though, you know, it's right underneath our feet, it's not eye-legible, right? You know, soil scientists know a lot about the wonders of soil, but how much does the public really know? Go to the next slide. Yeah. Go ahead, Garrett.
Let me just jump this really quickly. So for a little backstory, like we threw in, you're like, why are monoliths here, right? And we were going to kind of strengthen this idea of why maybe the boxes are really valuable, not just because of their compactness. So I just want to bring a shout out to this and how we kind of got here in some ways. So harken back to Dokuchev and Konstantin Galinka and the early World Soils Congress in 1927, and they were really concerned about these ideas too. And so they set out in that spin up to that event. And they kind of what's the word for what do you do when you have an artist do something and you pay them? What's that? What's the word I'm looking for?
Commission.
Commission. Thank you. They commissioned the collection of 50 monoliths that honored the trek that the World Soils Congress in the East Coast did. They never got made into anything, and they were found in a warehouse in the 80s, and then they got shipped to the World Soils Museum. And just that reality of this effort to try to get people to appreciate what this was and what this is, and that led to this. But you know, the reality that monoliths have their issues as well, and we'll get to that in a second.
Yeah, so you know, a lot of you or some of you may be familiar with the fact that there are archives and museums around the world that do focus on soil, and so that they contribute directly to, you know, increasing public awareness and also on the importance of soil. And while there are many, and some of them, as you can see here on the screen, from the Netherlands as well as Colombia, we also have an institution in Italy, and most recently I found that there's a soil science museum in Thailand. And probably in the United States, you're most familiar with the Dig It exhibit that the Smithsonian put together, which has become actually an interesting traveling exhibit as well. And so all of this really loans itself to the idea of how we can reach public audiences through a platform, be it a museum or a publicly accessible archive.
So if you've ever collected a monolith, right, it's a lot of work, right, to get the right location, to have the equipment, to get the thing out in the field. But these things kind of are amazing, right? The fact that people engaging with soils in the collection and the presentation is a very valuable tool. And that's why we're kind of pointing towards these correlation boxes as a digital version of that, right? But they take some work, man, and you got to store them. Right. So, gotta get it, gotta collect it. You gotta work with it, mount it. It's great, but man, I've got a collection. I started throwing my monoliths away, right? Because I don't have a way to store them. They take up space, they decay over time. And so this idea of trying to translate all that effort into a digital, durable space is kind of what we're getting at today, right? Another idea that really comes into this nicely is that in some ways, and this is something that Will brought to my attention, is that sometimes the boxes provide the untrained eye a much easier way to understand some of the subtlety that a monolith maybe doesn't provide, right? This is a boxed example of a pretty good analog for this monolith that was produced for fun. And we actually ended up putting this in a campus art event, and it hung in our campus administration building for a month, and we had appended it to kind of get people to provocatively think about what it was. But for untrained eyes and for public consumers, these correlation boxes provide a lot of the details that maybe you wouldn't see when the soil is in a monolith by itself. And it also nicely aligns with some of the visualization tools on Soil Web that kind of give you these generalized versions of what these soils may look like when you dig them up out in space.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that last statement Garrett was talking about, it's interesting when he first showed me a monolith, he's explaining to me the different horizons that he can see through the monolith, and I'm like, okay, I'm basically like going with what Garrett's telling me. And then when he pulled out a correlation box, it was very clear. So thinking about, as a layperson, as a person who's not a specialist on soil, and seeing that, wow, I can pick up texture. I can understand more about porosity. I can actually identify aggregates. I can think about the parent material because it's part of it is part of that box. And so those are the things that I'm picking out that Garrett's already starting to speak about in our conversations. And it's becoming more visible for me when I see it in the box itself. And so as you see in this image right here, Garrett and I are standing next to a table that we laid out different correlation boxes across our region that we are in Northern California, including Lassen National Park, as well as in Butte County, where Chico is located. And we put together and collaborated to put together this exhibition, which really focuses on how soils connect us, not just in terms of soil science, but also in terms of social and cultural elements and how we interact with soil. So kind of looking beyond museums, right, we can also see that there's a potential for digital archives, right? The University of British Columbia has an excellent collection, mainly focused on monoliths. We also have, of course, Soil Web, as Dylan will talk about later, that are really well positioned to address the current challenge that I was mentioning before about public access. So we need to think about and advocate for these archives as being contributors not only to protecting them and the preservation paradigm, if you will, but also public education and knowledge, right? And so how do we kind of draw upon those methods of museum collecting and museum curation with existing scientific collections of soil? And so that's like a new opportunity for us. So this is really what drove this project forward. So going back to the problem I raised earlier, like how should we think about how much and what the public actually knows, right? And leaning into the reality that the new possibilities of information on a computer screen, we can actually harness that digitization of soil.
And I'm just glad I'm not wearing the same shirt as in this picture, because sometimes that happens. You see a picture and then you're wearing the same shirt and it's kind of awkward. So I'm glad that's the case.
Yeah.
So you want to take this one, Will?
Yeah, so it's what's really important is this idea of resources to educate the public, as we talked about, greater care and concern about soil, which helps us understand more about ecosystems, sustainability, and regeneration, not just regenerative agriculture, but regeneration in a larger scope, and also sharing and promoting that hard work of soil scientists, as Garrett indicated earlier. I just wanted to say a couple of words about this idea of digital collections. So I really agree that there's a reason to consider digitization of soil collections is that in order to be seen by a public, right? These are also there are delicate documents and artifacts that must become visible. So there's a reason that why digitization matters. Additionally, it reduces and often eliminates wear and tear of a collection when you digitize it. So that durability of digital is really very real. It also allows for us to take images that we've digitized and make copies of them, right? Which you can't do with a soil correlation box. And so it also helps for the issue of deterioration, right? So it captures an item as it is in that moment. It keeps it in a particular condition for as long as that digital file exists, right? So this is not about preservation. I really want to emphasize that. It's much is gained by digitizing, but the permanence and authenticity are really not among those gains. It's really about enhancing research and educational opportunities, right, to a larger audience and creating access to that material.
So I guess what are we doing here, right? We're basically showing up at your office with this custom built light box so we can control the conditions of image capture to make them consistent, which allows for some automation of the processing of the information to make them, consistent light, consistent focal length, those types of things. Everything we're doing here, you could recreate fairly easily with a tripod and some lights and a controlled light space. So we're not saying that we have anything unique or special about how we're doing it. I just worked with them, through an iteration. We built a box before, and then we got our local fab shop to make us something that now we can show up. This thing's on wheels. We can pack our gear in this. It conveniently is the same size as a modest check bag at an airport. So we fly with this now, and we can travel with our equipment. We have a pretty good setup to be able to show up and efficiently create this digital archiving of the collections, hopefully that some of you have, that we're going to find out here at the end for our future field work. And then also to, kind of almost cliche, but ironically and iconically, we use the Munsell color book pages as our standardization for all of our internal standardization to make sure that the conditions are staying useful. So, we show up and we take pictures, right? And we end up having quite an archive already of that work. So over the last couple of years, once again, it's been interesting with the shutdowns and the uncertainty that you've all felt. But we've got about 7,000 boxes across the West. Our local collections of Humboldt County and the Redwood National Park. We've done a bunch of work with folks in Klamath Falls, and there's still boxes there that we're going to be getting. Boxes in Sonora from Tuolumne, Kings Canyon, Sequoia, boxes in Chico for Lassen in our local areas. And then this last summer, we traveled up to Missoula and did a large collection of kind of variable vintages, stuff from the 70s and 80s through current boxes, about Western Montana. And like I said, ironically, in the background of Will's frame is picture of Glacier Park, and part of our field reconnaissance for our trip to Missoula was hiking the high trail up in Glacier Park, and trying to get a little bit of context and some imagery for some of the things we want to try to do with this.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Garrett was just saying. The idea of not only the number of boxes that we've been able to photograph, but also the control. That rig that Garrett was showing is a really beautiful and very controlled space. So when you have a tripod, for example, as a person who digitizes collections quite a bit in our own museum on campus and with campus partners, it's every time you have to set up a tripod and set up lights allows for any type of lack of control, right? And consistency across every single site that we go to and photograph. So having the exact focal length, having the light set up in a particular orientation, and having a consistent place where the box is located. If you can see on that rig, there's actually a slot where every single box slides into, and that keeps that consistency. And also, every 50 or so photographs, we also take a picture of the Monsell book for color correction later on. And everything is logged. So every single pet-on ID is associated with every single box that we log into our database.
And it allows for a semi-production environment, like I said, having the slot and everything. We can go into a spot and, like we were in Missoula and collected, we were able to archive in a, good 2 days worth of work. We banged this out in, 2 days. And that's a lot of box handling, a lot of dusty nose hairs and all that kind of stuff. But, it works out really well. And we're really excited to continue this. And we got a chat about monoliths. Yes, for sure. I'm going to follow up when I get on to the next speaker. So, it said it just the reality of it, right? And you've all seen these. And I think that obviously for the professional set, for educational tools, for people interested in soils or being able to help people with local area knowledge, things like that. I mean, there's so much value in these, but just as pretty pictures, right? Here we have, these are a collection, some Lassen, some Butte County, but these are all within, 50 miles of where I'm standing today, right? And just the reality of getting people to appreciate the diversity of soil that's possible underfoot is a super useful goal for us, something we're trying to do, and that hopefully we can find ways to catch these before they're gone. A lot of storage units and issues with that and funding, and just really we're trying not to be, maniacal about it, but we're trying to find these and get them collected and get them digitized so we can make some use of them moving forward. The other piece, and I want you to talk about this one because this is really your expertise, but this idea of catching the stories of not just the boxes, but the people that collected them, and really trying to get this, because to this group and everyone that works for Soil Survey Division and has any connection to Soil Survey realizes that nobody knows what you're doing, and that this is this most critical resource for everyone. But like, how do we get some momentum on people understanding the value? So Will, you want to say a couple things about this?
Yeah, so what's important is, collecting not only the boxes, but also the stories behind the boxes and also the science behind it, right? So one of the things that we've been trying to do, it's been difficult for obvious reasons related to, each individual site that we've been visiting. But we've been trying to interview soil scientists that are associated with not only the site, but also the boxes themselves. So you can see a number of soil scientists in these images here, and we're using 4K imagery and video to collect these different stories from individuals to kind of help convey the stories about not only the boxes themselves, but also the landscape, the place itself. And it helps you not only to kind of stand back and like see the entire landscape and the region, but also, as Garrett mentioned, the process through which these boxes were created. And that kind of just adds to what I was talking about before about my own knowledge as a person who's not a soil scientist, but yet curious about soils. What can we learn that's beyond the box, right? And that's really what it is about, right? So trying to capture that and then creating a kind of oral history, if you will, of each individual box and each individual site. Of course, this is the hardest part, right? To capture knowledge of professionals, but we're trying to diligently pursue this in every site we go to.
It's been really fun and interesting. It's been one of the bold things that we've wanted to try to pull out of this, and it hasn't been as consistent or standardized as we wanted. But just point out a couple. Here's me and Dylan sitting in front of a wall of boxes talking about a couple, and then Jay up in Missoula. And this was a really great example of this gent here was a Forest Service or I think a Forest Service scientist who had worked in Oregon and got connected to Jay because Jay's uncle knew him. And this guy was sharp. I mean, 85 years old, 87, and he came in and just people like just the reality of us trying to honor these folks and what they did. And he brought us copies of, GTRs that he had had. And like, he was so excited that anyone was interested. And so like, this piece is like, could be spun out. Obviously funding is always needed, but like, this is a piece that I think as a group, we need to figure out how to not just talk about the data and the soil piece, but the people as well, and really bringing some humanity to what you all do. So what's next? We're excited. We got a big field season ahead. We're going to be hitting the road with our box, both in car and in plane. Likely, we probably kind of have a working trip to Western Idaho to a collection there. Some more sites in Montana, we believe, or Idaho and Oregon. And from a previous meeting, there's some sites in Western Wyoming, and we're going to try to coordinate that to do a big field gather. We found out about a bunch of new sites across the Southwest. Once again, we've got a staff person from this research and some students, and getting together a couple of directed trips to be able to go out and come where you are and get these boxes and get them done. And then obviously the unknown, like hopefully this meeting yields some additional sites. You can scan this QR code and it'll take you to a Google form. I'll also put the form in the chat. If you have any knowledge about any boxes, any collections. Early on, we were kind of focused on boxes that were already in pet-on and that had, an anchor, but we've kind of thrown that to the side, and we really want to be able to collect all boxes and hopefully at least have some way to locate them on a map. That then they could be anchored to that spot. And we know there's, I always hear the same question about concerns about private land ownership and all that kind of stuff. And we'll honor all those, but like, we really are just trying to, utilize the resources that we have funding wise and send our crew and us out into the field to collect these resources. So QR code, I'll put the form in the chat when we get done. So this is teeing up Dylan's talk and bigger discussion. It's bigger than all of us about where will these things live? Where do these digital archives go? We really hope that it's not like the last scene from the first Raiders of the Lost Ark after they got the Ark and Indiana Jones is in there saying, but this is important. We need to do something about this. And all the bureaucrats are saying, well, no, we got our best guy on it. Right. And this is the final scene of them pushing the Ark of the Covenant out into some warehouse to be found decades later, just like those monoliths that they did for the World Soils Congress. So hopefully we can find a way, and Dylan's going to address this a little bit, in a very dynamic environment that makes these easy to find, makes them durable, as Will pointed out, obviously public facing, that will support and augment existing resources, be able to make this already evolving space better. And then obviously any of your thoughts about what we should be thinking about, if we're missing anything obvious, those types of things. But, by the end of this summer, we should be, into the, 5, 10, 12, 15K, depending on how many boxes we find, and just finding a way to make them useful and make them available to this community and communities of both experts and public. So any final thoughts, Will?
I just want to thank everybody for welcoming us and having us talk about this exciting experiment and project. And on that, we'll get to the end, but if you know any anthropologists, it will change your life. It's been the most joyous thing that I've been able to do as an academic. I mean, soils aside, is starting to think more deeply and critically about people and how we can get people to really sit up and understand how important this is. I know that's something that many of you think about, and don't sleep on your anthropologists and sociologists if you have any access to that. So I'm going to stop my share. And we're going to move on to our next speaker, which is Bohn.
Meyer Bohn, right here.
Meyer Bohn. Thank you, Meyer. I didn't want to go Meyer. So I'm hosting. I'm going to make it quick. I just met Meyer recently through our workshop, and as I was asking for help on who would be reasonable people to be involved with this. And Meyer stepped up, and I think it's a very useful next step, thinking about not just things that exist, but things that exist digitally and maybe have different vintages. And how do we use our knowledge to pull information out of those to not have to photocopy and physically transcribe that type of stuff? So take it away, Meyer. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I came on to the scene of rescuing legacy data a couple of years ago with one of the grants we were on. And so I've been really heavily involved in this conversation. And yeah, Garrett and many others have piped up at other events. And I'm glad this finally came to fruition. There's a lot of good stuff to talk about. Can you see the screen okay there?
Yes, sir.
All right. Yeah, so unfortunately, I won't be talking much about the people that did all the hard work. I wish I could. I don't have physical resources either. This is all the digital. The work that you guys did is amazing because once this data is collected, it can disappear as fast as it was collected. But anyone who's collected a sample knows how much work it is, or if you've gone on a sampling campaign. So to lose that information is just devastating. So Iowa State had lost a soils database from their soil testing lab that had basically a bunch of pedons taking from all the survey work going through the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s. And so a lot of them were typifying unit descriptions, like full profile descriptions, lab characterization, you name it. There was 3,900 of these. The drive failed, but fortunately, the information still was on these archaic non-text embedded PDF scans. And so they were salvageable, but to convert that into a sort of usable database was going to be an undertaking. And we tried to take it on. And really, this effort is something that just had to happen because like Ryan Dermoody at Waverly had estimated that it could possibly take $8,000 to $10,000 just to do one KSSL head-on. So it's a decent number to tack on to how important these data are. So when we initially started, I had a team of 4 to 5 undergraduates that had spent 200 hours over a year. They got about 15% done. And then we also had the associated laboratory data with the site data. And over 2 years, also, they had only gotten about 15% done. And this was literally just painstaking work, taking a PDF, copying data from one header over into an organized database spreadsheet. And so I was looking at the numbers as the project was nearing completion. And if we had extrapolated out at our rates, we would have been spending 7 years and 20 grand on the site data, 13 years and 50 grand on the lab data to complete this. And I can't spend that much time here. I can't die at the Excel web screen. So I said we need to innovate. So part one was implementing ChatGPT-4's Turbo Vision for the site PDFs. And so what these site PDFs look like essentially is you have the series, the county, the state, the site number, and that ties to all the lab data. And then you also have some taxonomic information, but really the key thing here is getting our site ID, having our reference location, and then also the section township range. But the challenge is that we were running OCR through Adobe Acrobat, and the OCR is great because it can find letters on the page and it can convert them into some machine readable text, but it's really only good at reading words, and it doesn't really know where the data belongs under column headers or the data type or anything like that. And so when you run the OCR on these PDFs, there's just a lot of inconsistencies from PDF to PDF, spacing between the series, the county, the state. Site numbers might be on multiple lines. The location was all over the place. So it recognized the text, but there's no way to really systematically rip this data from this data set. And so I looked to computer vision because instead of just reading characters, it can look at forms and regions and locations and sort of have a spatial awareness and a formatting awareness to look for rows and columns and their structure and boundaries across the page. But this had to be scalable because we weren't just doing like 10 images uploaded into ChatGPT prompt. We had to do 3,300 pages. And so with that user interface, not only do you have the prompt upload limit, but if your prompting is different from batch to batch, the AI can drift, it can hallucinate. Basically, you have a non-reproducible product. So you needed some kind of reproducible pipeline that could batch these 3,300 pages through, have the same prompt every single time, a strict, rigid structure and output, and then also just logging, time spent per page, cost per page, things of that nature. So we looked to this GPT API pipeline with Python. So I was able to track the cost and the time between pages across the whole job. You could use tick token to estimate how many tokens you were using from the API, which is how it tallies the cost for using the service. And then also you could error log. And really, to start this out, in order to get it to work consistently, they use the term called few shot. And so in your prompt, you provide a few examples of the data set you're trying to work with. Because at least these PDFs were kind of the same format every single time, I give it like 6 examples, specify the headers that I want, and specify where that data needs to be extracted to. And so what this prompt looks like is you are an OCR assistant, extract exactly the following 29 fields from the image. Only extract visible data, don't guess. Only return these data in a JSON object. No markdown, no extra text, no flowery language, no nothing. Just the table. And you don't even need to write this. You kind of just need to write how you would be speaking to someone, and the AI can build the code for you. So you don't have to be a master programmer to do something like this either. So here's a few shot example from one file, and then it just has each header and then the information that was given in that example file. And so that's training the AI prior to seeing new data. With the results, it's just kind of mind-blowing how fast AI worked. In total, it took 15 hours to do it. It was doing about 4 pedons per minute at 2 cents a pedon. So we spent $72 versus the manual equivalent, which would have been 1,300 man hours and 20 grand. So, I mean, basically it did the job overnight, which is something we had worked on for 2 years, and it's just spectacular. Part 2 was for the lab data, where we partnered with Doctly AI. I think Ali, who helped me out, Ali Sheik, is on the webinar today. So he'll be able to maybe fill in on any technical questions that I can't cover. But like I said, for this talk, I'm going to tell you how to use AI. I'm not going to tell you how the AI works. Lab data was much more difficult. You've probably seen these.
I know. You're a very good looking boy, and you deserve it.
Oh, boy. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Are we good? Yeah, it was 5,000 pages and 28,000 horizons. And the tables are kind of messy. When you run the OCR on it, you can see right away that we're pulling text consistently, but the data columns aren't lined up. Like the silt fractions aren't in the correct location, or the clay fractions are shifted, or like pH, calcium chloride solution is shifted way over here, and organic carbon's here. So I had hit a dead end with ChatGPT. I was out of time, out of options. I needed help. When you need help, you should ask for help. Do what you do best and outsource the rest. So that's where Ali came in at Dockley AI, and he generously partnered with us to solve this problem. Dockley specializes in really form and table heavy PDFs, and it's for large scale document extraction like we were doing. And Ali was there to work with me to design the extraction logic. And once it was put together, I basically had modified it sort of just based on my user expertise with the soil data, since it's a data set that isn't familiar to him. But the user-friendly UI, the user interface, basically took all the work that I showed with the GPT workflow and built it into one screen. So in their app, you can have like the chat prompt on the left. You can have all your few shot examples in your middle tab here, and then you get an immediate output of what your prompt will produce on those few shot examples. And then once again, you can just use their API once you've finalized your prompt to get the extraction. And so these 5,000 pages were done in 34 hours, so a day and a half. One challenge that we could not get by was the fact that the data wouldn't always perfectly align with the columns, but we had fixed it enough to where it was an easy fix for me. I'm using an AI term here. I was the human in the loop for quality control. And so I just spent about 12 to 15 hours shifting like one column to the right or one column to the left. Like it was very patterned. It was a systematic error, but it changed with each batch. So I couldn't iterate it through coding or anything like that. But yeah, essentially, if you adjust for me being in the loop, I was doing 10 horizons a minute, and it's estimated that would be like $100 normally. And at our rate, it was around 50 grand. So with the total savings across the two methods, we had saved 4,500 hours in man time and yeah, $68,800, which is, yeah, mind-boggling. I have some accuracy results that are kind of preliminary. I'm still working on getting the text accuracy methods down. It's kind of a new process for me. But with the site data, I did just do like a small test set of 30 to sort of meet that confidence interval requirement. And if we compared it, the human entry versus the GPT-4 Turbo, we had an overall accuracy of 99. The site ID, which is pretty important, was kind of the only issue that we had seen with GPT-4 Turbo. That's why the accuracy on there isn't on the table. Still working on that, but because all of the site IDs are in the lab data and the Dockley AI pulled the lab data out perfectly, you can basically use those site IDs as references to partial match on mismatches that the GPT missed on. So that accuracy is still coming along, but still very promising results. So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to everyone that helped us out and our funders. Ryan Dermody, John Hamerly, and staff at Waverly gave us access to these data, told us about them, how to use them, where they came from, how to link them to other soil survey products. And then we're working on the quality control with them. My three most trustworthy and hardworking undergraduates that did most of the manual entry, Ali Sheik at Dockley AI, and then the funding from our NRCS grant, and then also Dockley subsidized our work so we could showcase the good work that they're doing. And so take any questions on this, or I can take them after Dylan is done. But really, what's the impetus behind doing all of this? Like if you wanted to see a concrete product that's coming out of saving these legacy data, here's an application in looking at the change in topsoil thickness across the Corn Belt over 40 years. And so you can see in the reds is where you have a thinning of that topsoil surface. There's enough soil scientists here That's basically the measure of the thickness of moloch colors. And then the thickening is in the blues. So we can use the past soil data to help us detect change and understand what caused those changes compared to the past soil condition. So that's all I have for you today. I can stop sharing unless anyone wants to pop back to a slide.
All right, I'm going to MC. Hopefully there'll be some discussion after. That's amazing work and so timely and so useful. So thank you so much for sharing that, and hopefully that inspires folks to go get the coffee stains off of their documents for future management. Super excited to introduce my colleague and friend Dylan. Just a quick shout out if you've worked with Dylan, he's, such a giving, caring person, and he's been very integral in my career. First publication, introduction to R, and helping me, solve lots of problems. So it's been really great to be able to work with him as a collaborator on the project that we're talking about, and just want to shout him out as a dear friend of mine, and I'm really happy he can come and share some stuff that he has to think about and share today. So take it away, Dylan.
Wow, thanks, Garrett. That was a wonderful introduction. Well, while we're talking about things that we're thankful for here, I just wanted to say that it's been an absolute pleasure working with cooperators like Garrett and Will and Meyer and many others who have really taken it, who have understood the value of some of these intermediate internal products and pieces that are used to produce soil survey and soil information. Some of these things sitting in dusty boxes in warehouses and other places. They've taken up the cause of protecting these things in the form of, digitizing them, turning them into educational materials, exhibits for museums. So it's really exciting to see this work being done. So I'm going to switch gears and maybe talk about something that's a lot less exciting than what these guys are doing. But it's something that comes up a lot. And it's something that I think maybe we can all work a little bit on into the future. So with existing cooperative agreements and then new cooperative agreements, think about ways that the data management plan that we describe in that agreement, how that evolves through time, and how, kind of as Garrett suggested, we want to avoid the inevitable, maybe it's not inevitable, but the outcome that we face sometimes where all of this excellent work is done and it's hidden away behind websites that have links that no longer work, or stuffed into GitHub repositories that are hard to find. There's all kinds of ways in which the work we do can be obfuscated and ultimately interfere with our mandate to make these data available to the public and to each other, so that we can learn from these data and make our products and new future products better. I couldn't remember. I knew there were some quotes about planning, and I couldn't remember them, so I looked some up, and I found one that I hadn't seen before. But I think most people are familiar with this idea that making a plan is not necessarily the same thing as executing that plan, and that sometimes the best plans really, they don't pan out in the face of, as Garrett mentioned, dynamic environments, which I think we're all learning about right now. But the second quote here I thought was kind of interesting, and it helped me frame this little short 10-minute talk here, which is that, it makes a lot of sense to come up with a plan. It focuses the mind, and it puts into writing the kind of the agreement that that ultimately is the justification for the funding that's moving around. But also having a set of principles to guide that plan, especially when plans have to change, maybe those principles are just as valuable, if not more so. Okay, so I'll put some sentences here and I will try and elaborate on them instead of just reading them. But the main idea here is, again, data management plans are essential for making sure, for holding both us and you, the cooperators, accountable for the data that are collected. And I'll kind of elaborate on what these different data pieces or assets might be. But I wanted to make it very clear that cooperative agreements, they result in far more than just deliverables, right? A big component of all of these agreements involves education. At universities, it involves mentoring graduate students. It involves mentoring undergraduates. Really, we're forging the links in the chain, the scientific chain of our discipline. And even though it's hard to quantify the specific value of that mentoring, it's just as important as anything that comes out of the agreement, such as a publication, right? I mean, clearly these publications have a lot of value to our cooperators and to our research staff. Those are the kind of the capital and the units of value that we're kind of judged by. So those are very important as well. So the idea is that these deliverables need to go somewhere and always accessible to the public. Publications, that route is fairly clear, so I'm not going to really elaborate on that. The data sources supporting these deliverables need to go somewhere. There's a couple different options that I want to talk about, but I think moving forward with the laws that are in place now and possibly with the evolution of these laws, the public has the right to see the data sources that were collected as part of a public effort. I'm sorry, as part of a government-funded scientific effort. Sometimes the intermediate results, so maybe not the raw data, maybe not the polished data, but maybe those pieces, those curated sets of data or distillations of data. Maybe it could be soil correlation boxes when we're talking about soil survey. Maybe it could be tables and figures. Anyways, there's a lot of stuff generated on the way to a publication. Those things need to go somewhere. Some agreements, I think, result in software or applications or maybe even websites that will, in order to remain valuable to the public and also to soil survey, those things will require regular maintenance. So that means that those type of deliverables, those type of results, we can't just dump them in a box in a warehouse. We can't just park them, say, in Ag Data Commons. They'll need something more than that. Also, I think most field and laboratory data that are generated by or through a cooperative agreement can and should be integrated into these national systems. So into NASIS, into our laboratory records. And there's ways that can happen, and a long history of that happening. And I want to just emphasize here that project managers, really, they're the ones who can help out during and at the end of each agreement to make sure that all of this happens. So two of the main places where we'd like to see, say, data collected as part of an agreement or these intermediate pieces, we'd like to see that end up on the Ag Data Commons. And that's definitely something that I need to learn more about so I can more effectively communicate to the PIs that I'm working with on cooperative agreements to make sure that these pieces end up there. But it's also something that I think the research staff with SPSD might be able to take a leadership role in, and in fact has already taken a leadership role in doing, in starting to put things there and document the process in which data flows from cooperator into Ag Data Commons, and that the required metadata are filled out so that we can all find this stuff later on. GitHub is another interesting place to put things. It's not always the most appropriate place to put things, but when deliverables or components of a cooperative agreement result in, say, source code or largely text-based content that will probably need to be modified and maintained through time, something like an R package. Well, the NCSS Tech GitHub organization is one way of kind of collating these different GitHub repositories. But I also think there's a lot of room for improvement here for our staff to better communicate with our cooperators and each other on how to organize these repositories and document them, and have metadata flow around to where it needs to go. But it is something that's there, and I think it's something that we can make use of. And I hinted to something in one of my first slides about some deliverables maybe are far more valuable when presented in context. And I'm using these excellent correlation box photos from Garrett and Will and their crew, and then of course all of our field staff who collected these over the last, well, I don't know, 50, 60 years. The images on their own are fascinating. They're works of art, but I'd say they're far more valuable when we can accommodate or we can facilitate integrating these kind of data with all of the back-end data that we know exists. So each one of these boxes has a user pattern ID. Each one of those user pattern IDs is linked to morphologic data in NASIS. Some of these are linked to laboratory data in our KSSL laboratory database. And some of these are even linked to ecological site concepts. All of those linkages can be very readily done through this ID system that we already have, that's already part of this collection that Garrett and Will and their crew have assembled. There is no way to use, for example, GitHub or Ag Data Commons or one of these boxes to put things in. None of those solutions are going to present these data in that kind of integrated format. That has to be done either using SPSD staff and contractors, which we're currently working through how that's going to happen. So I don't want to say it's impossible, but it's complicated. Or it could be done through other cooperative agreements. It could be done through existing cooperators, possibly subcontracts. There's a lot of ways that we can get this done. So I'm excited about that. And to kind of wrap things up here, I drew a picture on the whiteboard to try and organize my thoughts. And I want to say thanks to Garrett and to Katie Dynarski. I probably butchered your name. I'm sorry, Katie. And others, just kind of showing how I imagine some of the deliverables and assets from an agreement might flow through these different systems. Recognizing that what we call deliverables, what we might call cleaned up data sets or assets and publications, these things all share a lot of overlap, right? So even though I've made boxes and arrows here, we all understand that there's going to be overlap, and that's going to require some flexibility in the way we adapt our data management plans according to a set of principles, maybe yet to be written up as we kind of flow through this thing here. And that the data management plan outlines the main idea of how we want to organize this stuff. But then it's up to the project manager and PIs to make sure that the follow through continues beyond the end of the agreement, so that these data, again, are not placed into boxes or placed behind websites that are hard to find, to make sure that they end up primarily on Ag Data Commons, so that there's a DOI, right? That way we have a citable reference, to make sure that whenever possible, and in accordance with our Soil Survey Laboratory Methods Manual, data end up in our national records. It doesn't do anybody any good to have all these different data sets with different units of measure spread across a whole bunch of different entries in Ag Data Commons if we can integrate them into our national system. That's really the gold standard there. But then there's a whole other set of places or ways in which we can integrate these things. Code, R packages, or Python modules that start off on GitHub that are actively managed by, say, the original PIs and SPSD staff. Those things can then live on, published to systems like CRAN for R packages. There's other similar systems for Python modules, but these also can generate a DOI, so that there's this chain of provenance, this chain of citation that we can reference and really maintain a level of credibility through that citation that I don't think we've been able to take advantage of that in the past. But also with our internal infrastructure that's in development, the DS Hub, soil data access, web soil survey, third-party cooperators like SoilWeb. There's a lot of opportunities here to make sure that we present the great things that the cooperators like Garrett and Will and Meyer are collecting, make sure that they make their way to the public, make their way to our own staff, and make sure that they're presented in the context of all of these other data that are related, so that we can really make the most of it. And, I've got some to-dos here that I think we all understand there's a lot of room for improvement. And I'm excited to work with our staff and our cooperators to work on what these principles for adapting our data management plans might be on into the future. And that's all I have. Thanks for inviting me.
Boom. There it was. So we kind of left, this worked out. Whenever you say you're going to lead one of these or be a part, there's always that like anxiety that there's going to be enough content and it's going to be compelling and all that. And I think we clearly checked a few of those boxes. Pat myself on the back, I guess. But just that really did give us a nice universe of ideas, physiologics, legacy data that's not in a currently usable form, and Powerhouse, Meyer, that was fantastic. And then Dylan bringing it home with kind of where we all need to push and pull and make sure that we're doing that stuff. I wanted to shout out the mentor experience idea for the students and the next generation of people, and how important these things really are, and that it's not just about publication, which is important, but that it really, the amount of experience people gain. I saw that firsthand in these boxes because I received our local soil survey office's kind of collection of pedons in boxes, and I bought more correlation boxes and just put an interested student at it with no training, hadn't been in soil genesis and classification, and she just crushed making these boxes. They were the most beautiful ones I've ever seen with no training. So just the fact that these types of things really do lead to unintended outcomes sometimes, and really, knowledge and expertise and things like that. So we got a few minutes left, on here, and love to open this up for any questions or conversation for any of the speakers, thoughts, musings, that type of stuff.
Come on, guys, let's not be shy.
Food coma? Anyone?
There might be something in the Q&A.
Well, we have a lead. Yep. Go ahead, Skye.
I was just gonna say, Meyer, really interesting presentation. Have you had any success transcribing handwritten pedon descriptions? It seems like the biggest hurdle would be overcoming different handwriting styles.
So let's just say that the foundation has been built to try that, but I am very hesitant to do so due to time restraints and difficulties. But we did a little addition to this project was scanning 35,000 pages of correlation notes, descriptions, 232s. So we have all of those digitized, rectified, enhanced, contrasted better for reading with the AI. Just haven't really, these PDFs were the low-hanging fruit. And so we haven't really gotten to that point, but obviously with all the paper files sitting across offices across the nation, it's something that we make an advancement on it. We get the right funders and the right people interested. I think we could make some really good headway on it, but long story short, no.
as an aside, I mean, I worked on those lab data sheets, which are fairly well organized. I mean, they were just in PDFs, I don't know, 5-10 years ago. And the ways we knew how to extract stuff then, it didn't work very well. It's just amazing how far you got and how much easier it is now. So, I mean, I'm really impressed.
This was done back in October, and the AIs are even more powerful. Like, you can't get the paper out before a new, like the 8th version of an AI has been released. So
Okay, it looks like
Sean's question
Go
from the
ahead.
chat. Yeah. Your question is, why do we use the Munsell and not a color card? Honestly, it was an intentional bridge of comfort for the community, right? In a lot of ways, we used it as a way to validate that we were doing real soil science, right? Because that's the book that everyone's come up with, and we had color cards as well. We kind of did it in a way as kind of a bridging olive branch kind of idea that was probably as valuable as the color card. The first work we did with the last and set and the master student, that was with the color card, but we kind of chose to use a fresh. We wanted to support Munsell and their high dollar books, so we bought a brand new one to keep it pristine. And we did it kind of, like I said, as a bridge more than, I mean, it's good enough and high quality and does the same job, but it also let us say, hey, look, we're using the color book just like everybody else. Does anybody have collections that they want that they're going to tell us about? Like I know that Stephanie, we talked before, and you were the Wyoming on our road trip. But any other folks? And the other was Columbia in Illinois. Are there other folks that have collections that they think about, love, maybe want to tell us about? Perfect. Kara, you will be on that road trip as well. The last question is for you, Dylan. Oh, and Jay's here too. Hey, Jay.
Hey guys.
How are you, sir?
Great. Good. Yeah. Thanks for the presentations.
Yeah.
I missed the first part of this, but yeah, I had Garrett and Will come out and do characterize our box collections that we have here in Missoula, and they did a fantastic job. I mean, it's really amazing. They're kind of a machine when they roll in, and they really get it done. But I really like the stuff that that Meyer was showing as well. I think all of this work kind of like is filling a really interesting niche, and for us, in support of soil survey activities. So my question is, what is the outlook in our current ability to provide agreements for this and things? How does that look going forward? Are you guys able to? Are we able to continue supporting the work that you're doing, and just speak to that for a minute and how we can facilitate that and keep these efforts going? Thanks.
Okay, Jay, who are you asking?
Either of the three here that presented, yeah.
Oh,
just jump in.
Yeah. We're gonna squeeze the lemon we have until it is dry, right? So we're gonna get as much out of it this year as we can, and then hopefully figure out the next one if there's any way to amplify it, right, with other sources. We haven't thought about asking other sources yet, but Will and I have a project that we're super excited about that's being funded by a private foundation. And we haven't talked about this as something that we might try to find some funding for, but that is something when we start getting this overwhelming response and 10,000 boxes we need, we might think about that. Cause I mean, it's really at this point, other than some staff time and some travel, it's not a super expensive enterprise at this point, honestly. So that's something that I just came to my mind that we might be looking that way, especially for next year. We're probably pretty solid for this year, but yeah, that's one area that we potentially look is like foundation funds to try to capture some of these things. This is good. We have hands up. I think Larissa was next. Was that a good enough, Jay? I don't want to like sidestep it too hard.
Yeah, that was good. Thanks. I just want to figure out a way we can keep supporting this as
I'm
it
going to
evolves.
put a link to the slideshow in the chat so you can see the good pictures of them that we showed.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Larissa.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I just had a question that maybe might be more for NRCS or for Skye. So I have worked in other offices and regions that I know have thousands of correlation boxes. So I guess this is something we can talk about offline too, but what is the route for nominating another office that you don't supervise to be contacted by you? So I work in Alaska now, and even though it's very challenging to bring samples back due to helicopter weight and things like that. But I know of, especially in the Midwest, there are probably offices with hundreds, if not thousands, of boxes. So anyway, if you could maybe just talk about that, Skye.
Sure. Since we have our guest here, I won't elaborate too much, but we've made the offer to everyone. I think everyone's been waiting for some things to happen, but this is something we could work on. I just put in the chat, let's have some instructions for how to do this. So when we can't, Garrett and Will can't, I mean, maybe they want to tour the country, but I'm betting they don't quite have the time right now. But if we could figure out ways to do something compatible everywhere, build our own boxes, ship them around, whatever, that would be pretty awesome. I think the same goes for the sort of extraction stuff that Meyer talked about. And I was just thinking, as we're talking, I'm going to try to write this up for the weekly update with some links to the stuff you all are doing. And I will try to put something together that we can pass up to leadership, because this is a really cool combination of like hands-on stuff and new tech AI stuff that I think we can sell and get people, interested in. And I think you can just I think you can nominate whoever. If you want to nominate them right here, Larissa, you go for it. Otherwise, let me know and we'll nudge some people. How about that?
I just wanted to jump in real quick. I know, Larissa, you can take a moment to think about if you want to do that. But I wanted to just jump in. Like our intention with this project is not to have ownership over the process. It actually is to this is why we're presenting this to you. It's like, as Garrett indicated, it's not that complicated to make the rig. We actually are creating a flow chart right now with our staff and our student team, so that we can actually provide this to anybody. How would you build a rig? What focal length would it be? What a resolution would be appropriate? How to create uniformity. This is a big thing actually in digitized collections, especially in museums and around universities around the world, of how to create a uniformity in how things are actually cataloged, as Meyer was well aware, like how things are actually documented and cataloged in a database. So if we can create some type of uniformity, which is not difficult, then it's very possible that with a few $100s, honestly, just to build the rig and having an SLR camera, it's possible to have each site even have their own, or each region to have their own, that they could pass along. and then we can create a spreadsheet or database for all of this information. Yeah.
Aaron, I think you're up.
Unless Larissa wanted to finish, but
Nope, I'm good. I'm gonna probably just talk to Skye and not just start nominating offices live here. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
awesome. My name's Aaron Hurd. Thanks for the opportunity. Question for maybe Dylan. I was wondering if you could elaborate on the correlation between wet and dry colors and how this, can advance into some other things, or if there's identifiable gaps in the nation on like low numbers of color data that we could target, low hanging fruit areas, sort of to fill in the database with color data.
Well, thanks, Aaron. It's good to see you. I promise I didn't ask Aaron to ask this question, but it's a good one, and I think it's relevant, and I promise to keep this very short. So one of the motivations for trying to get this agreement together, right? I mean, Garrett, Will, and I have been trying to get this thing together for at least a decade now. So one of the original motivations has been to increase the amount of soil color information we have, so that we can come up with maybe better estimates for range and characteristics of soil color for soil series, improve the way that we talk about soil color, maybe eventually bring soil color into Surgo. Yeah, to support all kinds of things that depend on soil color, recognizing that we have a relatively small, well, actually it's not small, but that we have limited information on soil color for any single 232, any single soil description. We usually write down 1 or 2 colors per horizon when we understand that there's quite a bit more information. So I think the answer is yes, let's do that.
Good. Alan, more?
Yeah, I got questions probably for Dylan or Skye. I'm not sure which one. Is there any progress being made on having photographs being able to upload to NASA's? I mean, that would be a great step, in my opinion, because we've all got 232s. I've got hundreds of them, maybe close to 1,000 that need input into NASA scanned or something, but also photographs too. I mean, and some are, georeference, some aren't, but the georeference one, is there any push or any thought? I mean, we discussed this 10 years ago and nothing's ever materialized yet, but is there any thought or any want to put photographs into NASA's at some point in time?
You got a thought, Dylan? My comment is there's lots of thoughts. It's really hard. Enterprise content management, right? That was going to solve it and it didn't work. So I'm not sure where we are right now.
I'll just add, Alan, it's a good question, and I think it's something that every field scientist thinks about and also worries about. These intermediate products that we use to create the soil survey are just as valuable as the final product. So I'll share a quick experience and then how I think this might pan out. So through the DS Hub, managed under Jason Nemechek, we had a very large team of developers actively working on a system to keep track of all of our block diagrams, past, present, and future, with a new annotation system so that these things would be much more deeply linked into the different sources of soil information. That was going to be the prototype, the example upon which a system for doing the exact same thing with profile pictures and landscape photos. That same system would be adapted for those kind of data and then would eventually be adapted for the soil correlation box photographs. All of that is on hold, but I sure hope that we can return to that because all of the pieces and preliminary work are there. So maybe someday.
All those amazing cones and rock examples and all those amazing things that are in every field office. Like there's just so much stuff lying around that could be really rich information for people being trained, people that are interested. You know, it really would be such a fascinating and amazing world if we could build it. Thoughts, ideas? We managed, if folks remember the amazing show Car Talk, right, from NPR. We've managed to burn a totally good hour and a half here, talking about pictures and archiving and data and soils and important things. I'm going to let Skye close it off, but it's always great when you're able to give people back a couple minutes of their life. We're a couple minutes under, but we came in pretty darn close on this event today. I appreciate all your attention. It's been really great, and I'm sure we're going to have a queue of plenty of work to do with all the boxes that are going to come to the surface. And like I said, and lots of good ideas about funding and efforts and things like that. So from my perspective, this has been super productive, and I really appreciate everyone that came today. And we'll keep doing what we're doing here on the West Coast, but hopefully we'll be coming to an office, your office sometime, or somebody. Back to Skye's thing. Yeah, the box, fab shop, a mount, a little set of lights you can get from B&H or whatever that place is, that 4 of them that come in a case that charge. You can run 2, and when they run down, you put the other 2 back in. It's a pretty low tech setup to be able to produce very consistent photos. So like you said, we're not looking to spend the next 10 years trying to do this ourselves. So we'll try to work on the cookbook and start getting that out to people. So if people want to start working on this on their own, because we really just want this information to get into the public space.
Thanks, Garrett. Thanks to all our speakers, and we will get information out about this as soon as possible, including cookbooks and presentations and all the rest. So look for that. And this will be recorded, and when the transcription is cleaned up, it'll be put up on the YouTube page as well. So thanks to everyone, and reach out if you want to keep these connections going. I am sure that this committee will keep talking about this for the considerable future, maybe forever. We're just talking about soil. What could be better?
Yes.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Take care wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.